Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Harriet Sachs. I'm the volunteer moderator for our monthly patient chats. We've been doing this for many years now. So we began in 2014. This evening, we have with us Dr. Rebecca Koch. She's a clinical and translational researcher at Duke University Medical Center. She received both her bachelor's degree and her PhD in nutritional sciences and dietetics, and she's a registered dietitian. Dr. Koch now works on a research team headed by Dr. Priya Kishnani, and she is focused on the progression of inherited metabolic disorders. That's us, APBD. We are an inherited metabolic disorder. She's looking at the progression, she's looking at how these disorders present, and she's looking at factors that may be related to treatments. We're very pleased to have you with us this evening, Dr. Koch. I'm going to give you the floor and hope that you can do a great job. I expect that you're going to do a great job helping our patients understand what's going on at Duke. Thank you.
Awesome. No, I'm so excited to be here tonight, or I guess tonight here on the East Coast, to tell you more about the research that we're doing here at Duke and specifically about our observational natural history study. And a lot of those words I'll be going over in depth so that way everyone can understand here. But as Harriet said, I'm part of Dr. Priya Kishnani's research team here at Duke University. And part of what we focus on is the APBD experience and disease progression in APBD. So before telling you more about the study, I want to briefly go through what APBD is and how this study was designed to capture all of the aspects of APBD. Here, okay. So first, starting off with what glycogen is and what we're even talking about here today with adult polyglucosan body disease. Glucose is the main type of sugar in the blood, and it's used by the body for energy. So when you eat a meal, you are digesting the food in that meal. And part of what your body is absorbing for energy is glucose. So glycogen is something that's made by the body, and it's our storage form of glucose. So that's what gives us the ability to use glucose later when we're not physically eating, when we're going through a couple hours without eating a meal. And there are several proteins that are involved in forming glycogen. So you can see that here in this bottom figure. And so I don't expect you to know or memorize any of the words here. But the main thing I wanted to show you with this figure is that glycogen is this circular form, and that structure is very important. So I stole this idea from Harriet, and she was mentioning that glycogen is like a dandelion. And I thought that was a perfect representation of what glycogen is. Picture those little seeds coming off of this dandelion, and that would represent those glucose molecules. So when you're breaking down glycogen for those glucose molecules for energy, you see those little seeds coming off, and so that can represent the glucose sugar. So when we talk about what APBD is something where you inherit two mutated copies of the glycogen branching enzyme gene. So that means that you cannot make branched glycogen efficiently. So let me pull up this little figure here. So that is just a repeat of what I just showed you with normal glycogen synthesis. So when you have two mutated copies of that glycogen branching enzyme gene, so something that's helping you make the branched glycogen, you're going to have lower GBE activity, so glycogen branching enzyme. And then with that, you're not going to be able to branch that glycogen efficiently. So instead of making this perfect circular form of glycogen, what you instead have are these insoluble, elongated glycogen chains. And so that's just a fancy way of calling it with polyglucosan bodies. So that's what polyglucosan means. And so those bodies will accumulate across the body. And instead of, having normal cellular activity because you have glycogen in your cells, now you're going to have these insoluble bodies within your cells, which can interrupt those normal cellular activities. So the reason that we're talking about glycogen is APBD, like I said, you're not able to make branched glycogen efficiently. So when that happens, you're having what's called a glycogen storage disease. So all of that means is glycogen cannot be created, stored, or broken down efficiently or properly. So a specific type of glycogen storage disease is what we call glycogen storage disease type 4. So that is the inability to create branched glycogen. And that's due to low amounts of that branching enzyme. And so glycogen storage disease type 4 is caused by mutations in that one gene, the glycogen branching enzyme gene. And its clinical presentation is very unique, though. It spans a whole continuum, so it can affect children all the way up through adults. And so glycogen storage disease type 4 has both children and adults, also known as what we're talking about here today, APBD. So I know it's confusing. APBD is the adult form of glycogen storage disease type 4. And to make matters even more confusing, GSD4, or glycogen storage disease type 4, is often notated in children. So children with this diagnosis are often called our glycogen storage disease type 4 children. And then in adults, it's most often referred to typically as APBD. So likely you've never even heard of glycogen storage disease type 4, even though APBD is technically the adult form of this disease. So the only reason why I mention this is because in our natural history study, we're collecting all of this data. So a natural history study collects information about the natural history of a disease in the absence of an intervention. So this is from the FDA, this is their definition. And what that means is there's no treatment involved in this study. There's no specific intervention. It's just looking at the disease course itself. And so natural history information is usually not available or is incomplete for most rare diseases. And therefore, natural history information is particularly needed for these diseases. So this is what APBD counts as. It's a rare disease, and natural history information, like you've probably heard before from your physicians or even just amongst yourselves in the community, information is desperately needed on this disease. So why are natural history studies so important? Well, first, they help researchers like us understand disease progression in general. We don't know what the disease progression is unless we actually have data that shows us this, and that comes from the patients themselves. We don't want to just assume something is going to happen or assume that this is the disease course that's going to happen. We want to see documented evidence that this is what's actually happening in our patients. It also provides details of how a disease actually affects people with this disorder. So not only do we want to see lab values or things of that sort, but we actually want to see the quality of life impact. We want to hear about what this disease, how it's impacting the daily living of our patients. It also, importantly, supports the development of treatments and therapies. So when researchers are looking into how to develop a treatment and how to actually, see what therapy could help patients, we need to actually understand what is even going on with the disease. And lastly, it helps us identify what unmet needs exist. So as we continue on with our research and we see, okay, we very clearly understand that patients need assistance with walking, or patients could use assistance with their bladder. That's very important. And it's also showing us what unmet needs are still there. So what are patients not able to get care for that certain treatments or therapies aren't helping? Examples like that. So the best place to find where natural history studies are is on what we call clinicaltrials.gov. So this is a federal website, and it has information on all different trials and observational studies included. So it could have actual interventions, but also what we call an observational study, where we're just seeing over time, no intervention. We're just looking at what is happening with this disease. And so this is a website that you can enter in, so clinicaltrials.gov. So if you were to look up our study on clinicaltrials.gov, this is the site that it would take you to. So I'm going to spend a few moments just walking us through. There's a lot of information here, and I just want to clearly show you each individual part of this study on clinicaltrials.gov. So first, we have the title. So I mentioned that GBE, or glycogen branching enzyme, is what's affected here. So if we look at the different words here, GBE stands for glycogen branching enzyme. So again, that's going to be the thing that is reduced in APBD. We have GSD4, so that's the 4 is the Roman numeral for the numerical form 4, and that is glycogen storage disease type 4. And then we obviously have APBD, which is adult polyglucosan body disease. So with GSD4, again, it encompasses APBD, but because a lot of the patients we have are children who are diagnosed as GSD4, or glycogen storage disease type 4, We also have our adult patients like you all, where APBD is the diagnosis. So even though it's a type of GSD4, we call them, that's often called different diagnoses. So we just want to clarify that all in one title. This study is including children with GSD4 as well as our adults with APBD. And then next we have the study description. So this shows you all about the study. It tells you what the study is about, who's included in the study, as well as some contact information. But for a brief summary, you can see here, it's a natural history study on glycogen branching enzyme, or GBE, deficiency, so meaning those with reduced or deficient levels of it. And it's diagnosed as glycogen storage disease type 4, also known as GSD4, or adult polyglucosan body disease, also known as APBD. So again, just showing you kind of the general information, and contact information is also included. It just couldn't fit on this screen. So next we have our clinicaltrials.gov identifier. So this is unique to clinicaltrials.gov. It's just the study ID, and really for the patients themselves, it could be helpful if you know this and you can tell your medical providers that you're enrolled in this research study. So it's more just for when you're receiving care, just so everyone knows, if you want them to know if you're enrolled in the research study, for their knowledge. And then lastly, we have the condition or disease that's included. So I hope it was clear with the title, but this includes glycogen storage disease type 4 patients, including adult polyglucosan body, so our adult patients. So again, eligibility criteria, anyone with those diagnoses is eligible, regardless of age, gender, or ethnicity. You do not have to have specific symptoms to be included. You don't have to have any symptoms at all. You could have, what we call atypical APBD, if you've heard of that. You could have no symptoms. Anyone is welcome as long as you have a diagnosis. This also includes international patients. So this is not something that's only specific to the US. We have patients from all around the world enrolled in this study. And for those of you, if you have a family member or a spouse, and if they are deceased, we're also able to include those records. So I'm happy to give you more information about those next steps if you would like to talk about any deceased patient records. So what type of information will we collect? So anything that is clinically relevant is included, and meaning it really is a lot of general information that's all found within your medical records. So when you go to your doctor, they have a whole host of records, now electronic, that we're able to see to get general information about your medical history. So that includes your name. If you are enrolling, we will have your name documented. We'll have your date of birth. This helps us understand the age and disease progression across the age, gender, how you were diagnosed. So whether that was through genetic testing, some of you might have had histology, meaning you get a tissue biopsy and that shows the polyglucosan bodies. Some of you might have also had what we call enzyme activity testing. So that again was done with a tissue sample. And again, as long as you have a diagnosis, that is enough to enroll in this study. You don't have to have a specific genetic test or a specific enzyme activity test. We also will take a look at your tissue biopsy report. So meaning if you did have a biopsy, we will take a look at what the provider found on that biopsy. So did they see polyglucosan bodies, anything of that sort? If you get any imaging, meaning if you go for an MRI or you go for abdominal imaging or any sort of imaging, we will see the results of those. We'll also gather your symptoms and any of your medical history or surgical history. And we'll also, if available, look at your medication and supplement use as well. So something to note is even if something is normal, such as on your imaging, say you had completely normal imaging or your bladder tests are completely normal, even that is super important and very helpful for us to document, because we need to know, even in many patients, there are normal things that are happening as well, and we want to make sure we have that documented as well. So how is your information protected? First and foremost, you're identifying information like your name, your gender, your age is never published, and it's fully kept confidential. So we will never publish your date of birth, we'll never publish your full name. We'll use more general identifiers like your general age or your gender. Your medical data is stored securely and only our study team can access it. So no one outside of our study has access nor the ability to access any of your medical data. All web communications are what we call encrypted, meaning secure. So if you were ever to email me, I would respond and you'll see there's an encrypted notice that Duke University has to make sure that all of our communications over email or any of the web communications are always secure. So this is what I want to spend the most time talking about. What does participation look like? So if we think of this as a roadmap, first and foremost, you're going to contact me. So what that looks like is, again, you will send me an email and we'll walk through all of this. But first is contact. Then you would officially enroll. Then we would gather your medical records. So meaning just our study team would do this, and I'll walk through the specific steps of that. We would then do what we call a yearly follow-up. So our study team would follow up with you to see if anything has changed, if you have any updated medical records. And then we're continuously publishing these results. So first, when we contact, or for contact, so step one, patients or their legally authorized representatives are welcome to reach out to us to start the enrollment process. And in just a few moments, I'll share my contact info so you can see that. Again, our study team can also accept medical records on any deceased patient. So if you have more questions or you think you might have records on someone who had an APBD diagnosis and you would like to have those records included, you're welcome to send me an email and we can talk about the next best steps for that. Once you contact me, I will then set you up with our study team and they would go through the consenting process. So what that means is we'll have a phone or a Zoom for those who prefer Zoom to review what we call an electronic consent form. So that is you formally giving us your consent. There is never any added study visit for this. You never have to come to Duke for just this study. You're welcome to come see us for care, but that is completely separate. You will never be asked to come for a study visit for this. Everything from our end is done electronically. At that time, when we do the consenting appointment, we'll ask for information regarding your medical providers. So we do this because we find that it's easier if you give us the names of your providers and we can help assist with gathering all those records. So at this time, we'll ask you for any of the names of your providers, as well as, this includes annual checkups, if you have a specific neurologist, a specific urologist, a physical therapist, any of those providers that are helping you with your care. And then step three, we're going to gather the records. So our study team will submit all the forms needed to have your medical records sent to us. In some cases, we will need your signature for the hospital to release your medical records. So what this looks like is, again, you have given us the name of your provider. And so we will contact them. We'll see the next steps to having them send us your records. A lot of times we do this via fax or an email. Different hospitals have different systems to keep this secure. If preferred, however, though, you can directly send us the records. So if you have records sitting at home and they're saved to your computer or, they're paper records, you're welcome to send us those directly and I can walk you through those steps as well. But we are more than happy to take this extra burden off of you and gather the records ourselves because we find that this can be pretty time consuming. Then we're going to have our yearly follow-up. So our study team will follow up with you every year to confirm if your list of care providers is still current. So what this is going to look like is, again, we will send you an email or phone call, depending on whatever you prefer. And we're just going to check, that these are the current names. And that way we can go ahead and proceed with repeating step three and gathering those records. And then step five is really a continual process. The way that the research community and the medical community at large understands a disease and understands how to treat it and potential ways to treat it is really through what we call publications. So if you look up a study, there's this formal document that's written up all about a study. And this is something that we're continuously doing. So we're always publishing research for the research and medical community to read. So really, this is not a roadmap that just keeps going in a linear line or a straight line. It's really a circle. It's a continuous process. And we're constantly enrolling patients. There's no end date. We're continually on a rolling basis enrolling people. And then again, we're continuing to publish results. So if you are interested in enrolling or learning information, you're welcome to contact me directly. I listed my email and phone number here, or even better yet, you are welcome to contact Harriet specifically, and she can connect you directly to me. So we find that can be helpful because I know that you all know Harriet very well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this slide up because I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I see we have about 7 minutes left. So I want to leave time for Q&A. So I'm going to leave this slide up, and then Harriet, I will let you, or Calliope, whichever one. Let me pull up my video here. I will let you all take the lead on the Q&A if that's okay.
So the first one that came to me was as follows. I got a bunch of wrong diagnoses. Do you want those medical records too?
Yes, so any records, including misdiagnosis, is very helpful.
That same person wrote, this is only a medical record review. Yes, you're not talking to me in person, right?
Correct. Yes. So this is just a medical record review. So if you would ever like to be seen at Duke, I can assist you and connect you with our clinical team. But correct, this is just of any medical records at your local care places.
Okay, how you doing, everybody? When does GBE4 become APBD? At like what age?
That's a great question. So that's something we're actually, the whole reason why we even have this study, including both our children and our adults, is to try and address that exact question. So right now, we don't actually know, it hasn't been published many times, if our children will go on to develop APBD-like symptoms. So the symptoms are pretty diverse in children versus adults. So at this time, I don't have a clear answer for you, but that is something that we're hoping to address, because that's something our children's parents often wonder as well, is will they go on to develop APBD?
Right. I just got one more thing. Like, could my body ever make glycogen? Like when I was a kid, before I started to develop symptoms at 50, could my body ever make it and then it stopped?
Yes. So what we found with APBD is that there's still what we call residual amounts. So you still have enough to, supply you energy throughout your body. But in different patients, we've seen different things. So someone with APBD could have very minimal activity and they might have more severe symptoms, but others seem to have enough that, again, still keeps them surviving and still keeps their blood glucose. You still have enough energy throughout the body. But this polyglucosan body that's developing, so let's say in your nerves, that's actually impeding your nervous system. So that's where your symptoms could be coming from. So it really does depend. And I hate the answer of that's why we have the study, because I'm sure, as you've seen, there's so much unknowns. I mean, this is one of my focuses for the research study that I'm doing, or research that I'm doing here at Duke. And all of these questions, even with our medical providers, are still big question marks that we're hoping to address through this.
Gotcha. Okay. So when I was 20, my body was acting just like every other normal person. And
it could have been that, this is developing over time as well. So it could be that because your nerves are they're so sensitive to any disruption, it could be that, again, it's accumulating over time, and you might have pushed that threshold to where now you're starting to show symptoms. But it really does vary by patient, because we have some patients that present, at 20 years old, and some that can make it all the way to 60 and have no symptoms as well. So yeah, there's definitely a variation.
Thank you.
Great.
I've got more questions that piled in, so let's go quickly.
Yep. And then we've got two
registered.
folks with a raised hand. Sorry, Harriet.
Go for it, please.
Oh, are you sure? Let's go to Michael and then back to Harriet, and then we'll go to Kathy and Jennifer. So Michael.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. This is a great presentation. I'm a newly diagnosed patient for APBD, and I was wondering, because I've heard a lot of different things on diet and its potential long-term impact and beneficiary impacts. Have you done any studies, or is there any information on that?
Yeah, it's as a dietitian, I love that question.
I love hearing that.
I know. So unfortunately with APBD, there has not been a formal study that has looked at diet as an impact for symptoms. There was one study that was done on our GSD4 children. And I can share that with Harriet maybe, and she can send that out, but it's pretty inconclusive because it's just such a wide variety of symptoms that patients can have. So in our children, they can have very severe liver disease. And so that's something that's not very common in APBD. So the use of diet is going to be different, depending on what symptoms that someone has. But unfortunately for APBD at this time, there's been no formal study. Definitely something that if someone wants to fund me to do that, I would be happy to look at that.
Figure that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
From one of our attendees through me, I am registered in the Columbia University Patient Registry. Why am I doing more?
That's a great question. So one thing I didn't mention, and forgive me for that. So our Duke study and the Columbia Registry are a little bit different. Both are important for different reasons. So we work with the Columbia team. We know exactly who's running that study, and it's a little bit different. So the Columbia Registry is also looking at the prevalence of APBD and some of the symptoms. But what's unique about their study is that they're actually looking at it from a medical provider standpoint. So you're given a questionnaire and you give that to your medical provider to fill out, and then they submit that for you. And again, that's going over some of your symptoms. The way that our study is designed is just different. Again, both have pros, both have benefits to them. But the way our study looks at it is we take your entire medical record, and we don't have a set list of questions that we're trying to document and answer for. We're looking at the whole entire medical record to see any trends, trying to address some of these questions that you guys are even asking right now. But more, it's just a different way of looking at it. So whereas we look at the comprehensive medical records themselves, Columbia is looking at specific questions from a provider to answer.
Great, thank you. We're going to go to Kathy, who has her hand up.
Now, by enrolling, is there any chance that they will try any medication or any technique to try to improve? That's my question.
Yeah, that's a good question. So under our study, there will be no intervention or treatment. However, that being said, the whole goal of this study is to continue to publish results and publish findings. So that way, whether it's our group separately from the study or other groups can better understand the disease. And ideally, that way we're not replicating work. Our team has taken on, we're going to publish the natural history findings for the disease. And then hopefully our group, but also other groups can use that information to better develop medications, different therapies, different treatments.
Thank you. Another question from the floor. Well, we know that there is a lot of variation between APBD patients. How can this study be helpful? I just don't get it.
Yes, so the reason why, from a researcher standpoint, so when Harriet introduced me, she mentioned that I do both the clinical research, but also what we call translational research. And that means how do we take what we're finding in either an animal model or a patient model to develop treatments? Because we can't just go right into patients and assume that something's going to work. We have to test it in an animal model first. And I think what's really common in the patient population is it's assumed that we know all about what's going on with the disease. And I can tell you, we work with people from all around the world, and people, they don't understand APBD. They'll know one thing about APBD. If you talk to a neurologist, they might know the neurology really well. If you talk to a urologist, they might know the bladder symptoms really well. But we really need consensus and for everyone to better understand the disease progression. So really the whole idea of this is to have it documented, to show from the patient experience what they're actually going through, what their symptoms are, how it's progressing. So that way we can really develop therapies to actually help APBD. I think it's often thought that researchers and scientists just know what to do. And really with APBD, it's incredibly important that we know actually from a patient perspective and what they've gone through throughout their life, really. But we can read that from the medical record, just seeing the disease progression. So I hope that answered your question. I know it was kind of a broad answer, but I'm happy to talk more too if someone has specific questions about that.
Great.
Question from Harriet.
Yes.
Harriet's question is this. If I get to be the leader, I get to insert one of my own questions. Is there a threshold number of responses that you need to get before anything can be analyzed, published, distributed? We've seen that it can take a long time to even get 6, 8, 10 things, 10 patients.
That's a great question. I think for rare, well, I know for rare diseases, no, there's no number. Even in one patient is helpful to know. So that's what we call a case study or a case report. It depends on what question you're trying to answer. So if we're trying to understand the entire APBD community, what do they experience in childhood? Obviously, we're going to want more and more people for that, but there is no maximum or minimum number of patients that we need for this study. We're constantly trying to publish our results. But an asterisk to that is that we really wanted to make sure it's reflective of the APBD experience in all people, all genders, all areas of the world. So of course, the more people that we have to represent that, the better.
But my question really is a minimum, a threshold. I know you want more.
No, there's no minimum. So it's because it's a rare disease. In the rare disease community, it's very common to have 5 people in a study. And I can tell you, we have that. So there's no minimum.
Your question.
Yeah. Well, he had the question for me. Yeah, but the way my response, my question is can you help me?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So what I would recommend is if Harriet, she'll share my email and my contact info.
Correct.
And I think the best way would be Dr. Kishnani is our clinician who's our expert in all glycogen storage diseases. And she sees patients. So I can set you up if you would like to be seen, but 2, separately, because I could talk for an hour about all the different things that we're trying to research and all the other groups as well are looking into. So I'd be happy to go over that a little bit more.
Right. And I just repeat what you said about having a neurologist, they might know about something. And my neurologist said to me last week that I was her first APBD patient.
Oh, yeah. Very common. Very common. Yeah, unfortunately. But that's something, and I'm happy again. I know Harriet will talk after me about their conference that they're having as well, which will start to talk about some of these other groups that are looking into therapies and treatments as well. But very common, unfortunately, that someone might know something or not anything at all.
Great. Quick question in the chat. Can you recommend any simple diet changes that may help us?
So I can't, from a practitioner standpoint, offer any diet strategies. As a dietitian, I can tell you that really with APBD, the symptoms don't seem to be necessarily related to the diet because it is something that happens over time. But I can definitely share the diet study that was done in children if it's helpful at all. But unfortunately with APBD, a lot of the symptoms in most are related to the nervous system. And that's something that's really hard to alter with the diet. I wish, from a dietitian standpoint, I wish I had very specific, recommendations, but unfortunately at this time, we don't necessarily have any.
Thank you. Over to you, Harriet.
Another one. If a patient encounters a glitch at any point, is there somebody who at Duke's end who's going to be, stepping in to do some hand holding? Because
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So with anything, I think it's hard with all of these different steps. So even here, I mentioned again, our study team's with you every step of the way, including myself. So we will walk you through. If we ever need a signature, we'll walk you through. But the whole idea is we really try and alleviate any burden or responsibility on your end. So we try and get all information up front. Who are your providers? And we directly contact them if it's okay with you. Of course, if you prefer, we don't have to. But our standard is that we will try and do as much as possible for you. And let's say if you encounter a glitch, let's say if you are trying to submit a request to have your records sent to us, and for some reason it's not working, or the hospital saying that something's not working, we take it over directly. There are rare instances where we really rely on your help, to expedite it. Most of the time, hospital to hospital, we're able to get everything accomplished.
All right, Dr. Koch, thank you. We run you through your paces. We appreciate your time. This is a big ask, and our patients need to think about the pros and cons and the difficulties and the benefits, and you've helped open the door so that they can ask more questions. I'm going to encourage everybody, if you noted Dr. Koch's address, that's fine, but if you want me to just put the two of you in contact with one another, I'm happy to do that as well. I'm at your service, guys. With this, I want to thank you again, Dr. Koch, for your time. It's just remarkable that we can put something together. I'm on the West Coast. Our listeners are all scattered over the North American continent, and there you are on the East Coast, and we're all, we've got the same goal, and that is to get treatments and cures into our patients. Collecting data is not fun. And sometimes it's a hard sell because where's the treatment and the cure? The clock is ticking. I'm saying that on behalf of every person in this Zoom room. Where's
Yep.
the treatment and the cure? That is what we need. Thank you so much for putting the time and effort into the slides, into their very clear explanations, and being there for us. We are grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.